And I'm not, well, I'm gonna say not one, but I only listened to one. And that was because one of my best friends, she sent me a link, and it was online, something she was starting. So she was just starting, I think she did, it was like her first episode, she sent it to me. And you know, out of support, I'm like, oh, let me listen, you know, make sure I can give her views, whatever. So I can't even say I knew how to find it, because other people say, oh, you know, you should listen to a podcast. I'm like, where do I find that? Like, I'm totally like novice.
Where do we find a podcast?
I'm novice.
Well, honestly, this is all good information.
S23.
So
Podcast. Okay. Now, so you download the app. You have to download an app?
Oh, okay.
So, do you listen to music on any kind of like music apps? Do you have Spotify? Do you have Apple Music or anything like that?
I'm sure I can find it. I just
If you have any of those apps,
It's on there. That's what I heard the kids say.
However,
That's right, although I don't have any of those.
Fortunately, through ALC, this is the silver lining, at least with my podcast, it's available on Podbean, which is basically a website in and of itself, where it's a description of my podcast, and it also gives an introduction to ALC, since I am under the ALC banner of the organization, and then they have a listing of all of the episodes to be heard there.
So it's Podbean, P-O-D-B-E-N.
Yeah, Faith Reconstructed Podbean.
I'm glad they showed
What's
it
it?
this morning
What's it called?
online, because there are two on
Yeah.
what's
Apple
Apple
again.
one, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that first one was
Was
her.
it Faith Reconstructed, I thought?
Faith Reconstructed, and the website is Podbean. So if you all type that in,
Right.
yeah,
P-E-A-N?
Podbean.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's .com or something like that?
.com, yeah. And also you can put it in the Google search and hopefully it'll come up. If not, Faith Reconstructed Nicole Dominguez, Faith Reconstructed Advanced Learning Community, and those are the things that come up. So 55% of the US population listens to podcasts. That's 155 million. And this is just within the US. As soon as it goes global, it goes even higher. That number doubles, if not triples. And by the way, when we say active podcast listeners, we don't just mean someone who listens to a podcast episode every once in a while. We're talking about people where podcasts are a part of their everyday routine. This is something that they listen to when they wake up as they're getting ready. It's something they listen to on their commute to work. It's what they unwind with at the end of the day. And sometimes it's for the sake of hearing a conversation going on around them. Sometimes it's educational. Sometimes it's for entertainment. But either way, this is a really valuable piece of media. And 48% of the age demographic of podcast listeners are 12 to 35.
Wow,
That
look at that.
explains why I'm not part of it. I just leave it.
Well, this is what's so valuable about this demographic. Where within this age group, this is where you are developing your personality. These are critical developmental years. This is times when your worldview is starting to come together. This is where people start to question their belief systems and learn about their identity and how they are going to view the world. And also, 25 and 35 are the years in which your prefrontal cortex finishes developing. That means that your character and your personality are solidified within these years. So this is a critical age demographic that is starting to see podcasts as a regular part of their life. And now this listenership tripled within the quarantine effect. My entire podcast is the result of the quarantine effect, which is a social phenomenon caused by the pandemic as a catalyst for searching and eternal reflection. So when you were in that time of isolation, when you were in lockdown, you were having questions. And if you didn't have a safe space in which to ask those questions, you were going to find answers with the resources available. And one of those resources is podcasts. Somewhere there has to be an expert who has shared their point of expertise and viewpoint in order to put together an answer that I can use. And so think about the developmental years that are available. This is the time when they are getting to know themselves, their personality, they're questioning things, and they're moving out of childhood into adulthood. And so for this experience, this quarantine effect has had insane repercussions, both for the good and for the more challenging when it comes to that developmental process.
Question right there.
Yeah.
In the last class, you're the one who gave the definitions. Safe place. Everybody keeps throwing this word around. I don't have a quote to hang on. The last guy said he wasn't even going to tackle it because it's different for everybody. But is there a simple sentence for what safe place means?
So a safe place, and I'm actually really glad that you asked this because it is a word that we throw, a phrase that we throw around a lot with not a lot of answers. So as they had said before, safe space is going to be different for other people. However, a safe space, as a rough idea, is an environment. And that environment can be a group of people, it can be a relationship, it can be a group, it can be an institution, a place in which questions can be asked without judgment and without any criticism. So it's a place in which you are allowed to simply come apart and be yourself. Church is designed to be a safe space.
100%.
It's designed to be a place of where you're like, okay, so I am struggling with how I'm supposed to grapple with this one topic. I don't know how to feel about my anxiety. And so safe spaces where those internal thoughts and struggles and doubts can be vocalized without fear of judgment, criticism, dismissal, or being gaslit. And by what I mean by being gaslit,
That I know.
yeah. So
Well, no, define it for me,
So
please. What is gaslight? They all the young ones are using that too.
That's an important one.
So gaslighting is actually, the origin comes from the 1940s movie Gaslight. And this movie, the premise of it is essentially a husband who is trying to convince his wife that she is going insane. And so that is a form of mental abuse, often used within domestic violence and often used within people who are clinically diagnosed as narcissists in order to make you question your reality. So it is if you are coming in and saying, I have felt constantly dismissed, I feel like you never really care about our relationship, I feel like you are constantly dismissing me or making me feel hurt or small, and them saying, no, you're not, that's not happening at all, you're absolutely wrong, why would you say that? And in some cases, turning it around and making them the victim and you the abuser. So if used within gaslighting, if used within a religious setting, can often be placed as, no, your faith is absolutely in question, or no, you don't actually struggle with anxiety, you just need to pray more. So it's a kind of dismissal that is trying to be used in order to either ignore the problem or try and keep some semblance of authority for the other person in order for you to question your reality and question yourself.
I know it from the domestic violence and my legal background.
Yeah.
It's basically making another person think they're crazy.
Yeah.
That's what she started out. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Gaslighting is making the other person think that they're crazy when in fact they're not at all.
Yeah. In addition, it's just an exceptional movie, but it is a very real thing that can happen in many situations and many environments.
And it happens even in its lower degree, just in relationships. You've got some girlfriends that you talk to.
Yeah.
I mean, gaslighting is the bottom line where someone is not validating.
That's the word I'm going to use.
They're not
Yeah.
validating your feelings, your position. They dismiss it.
Yeah.
They're not validating it. They're dismissing it, and they're implying that you're crazy for even thinking it.
Yeah, and so then you spend more time defending yourself or questioning your reality than actually addressing the issue at hand. So quarantine effect, and going back to that, the importance of podcasts as a digital evangelism tool.
Light has
no shadow.
Oh, light has no shadow.
So evangelism is a word that can sometimes develop dust in our minds. We can often think that evangelism is only supposed to exist in a very specific form and in a very specific way. And if it doesn't exist within those ways, then it is somehow failing to be evangelism. So the definition of it is the spreading of the Christian gospel by public preaching or personal witness. And evangelism by nature must evolve. The minute we become more committed to the method than to the message, it fails to be evangelism. Because you are signifying that the true importance of what is being said is found in the vehicle and not the message itself. So you are also limiting God and his capacity to move. And podcasts are an amazing new format in order to expand our understanding of evangelism. However, it is one of many ways. Because though we must expand the definition of evangelism, podcasting and digital content is a relevant vehicle for evangelism. We have to think outside of the box and explore how you can play into your strengths, because there is absolutely no way that we have had the creative and innovative God that we have had, who has given us unique personalities and unique strengths, and to assume that he has meant for his people to only work within a very, very narrow format that can only really work for a couple of people.
Which one of those symbols are there? The first one?
Oh, so
The first one is a,
well, actually, that's for a barista press. So, you know, when in an espresso machine, where you have the espresso grounds, and you put it within a specific handle, and you remember how you see them latch it in, so that as it is draining through, this is a barista press. So this is,
Barista press, kind of
Yeah.
like a strainer for
so,
coffee.
okay, so what is that illustrating?
so this is just saying it's all worship. Kind of going back to what Kirk and Randy were saying of where we can often think that evangelism can only exist in specific forms, i.e. sharing sermons, or inviting people to sermon series, or doing Bible studies, or inviting them to a church service.
Do all of this.
So this is a barista press, so saying you can be a barista
I got that.
and having that, and then barber. So if you have a regular client that's coming in, a painter, kind of like what Xavier does, and then motherhood or going into childcare and music. It's all worship. But we have to keep the gospel at the center. That has to be the anchoring point for every single way in which we are able to explore.
So those of us who buy orders, you might want to label those for us, because I have no idea what they are without.
Oh yeah, sure. And this is just a simplistic graphic just to kind of show the variety in which
And
these
all the
people
differences.
exist. And all the differences that they
But I
exist.
didn't understand the first two. I couldn't even tell the first two is iron, so I wasn't sure what the bottle was.
Well, that could be a reason for somebody, if they're paying attention like you are, to question and ask, because then you're going to start
I'll
explaining.
wait a few people I'm going to ask, but if you have a larger class, may not.
So this is basically how to become a podcaster. Heather Moore, my producer, gave me an outline and a blueprint in which to put everything together.
Whoever designed that put in the ladybug, I just told somebody ladybug is a sign of good luck.
So if you like, this can actually be a good time for you also look up and find where the podcast is. So if you want, look up the podcast, Google it now, see what comes up once you find it and everything like that. If you have Spotify, if you have Podbean, if you have Apple Podcasts, even if you just want to Google it.
Yeah, you can Google it, because I don't have Google Podcast, but I'm assuming that's an app I can download.
Oh no, Google
And
is
then-
just, you can just put it within Google and see whatever
What comes
comes
up.
up.
Okay.
So as you guys are looking that up, you're going to see a couple things come up. You're going to see an episode list. You're going to see a logo, which is what you found here.
Right.
You're going to see a timestamp at the end. And the very fact that you were able to Google it and for it to come up is its own form of intentionality. The very fact that you were able to Google it and find it is just an immense value. And it's amazing. And also, that is the end product of planning. So as you're developing your podcast, you have to ask yourself from the start, what is my topic? What is something that you could talk about for hours? And remember, you are not the expert, but invite them to join you. I know so many people who have held themselves back from developing a podcast purely because they thought, well, I'm not an expert in this topic. I don't know everything about it, so I don't have the authority to go into it. That's the whole point of being able to come in as an ingenue and, as I had mentioned earlier, as a surrogate for the audience, saying,
Will we get copies of your PowerPoint?
you absolutely can, yeah. And so within this, you are able to step in for the audience and ask the questions that they may want to ask. And think outside of the box. You can have an evangelistic podcast that's about environmentalism and sustainability, about female representation in the early church, about music therapy, about a million different things. But remember to keep Christ at the center. Because if you think you cannot do an evangelistic podcast that is simply on an interest that you have, and it can't be considered a form of ministry, then maybe you need to reevaluate how you see Christ and the impact that he has. Who is my audience? Who do you want your podcast to reach? Who would be interested in or benefit from your content? Is it a niche? What is my age demographic? These are all guidelines for you to ask yourself, and these are some listings of things to keep in mind. If you want to reach out to D&D players, if you want to reach out to tech enthusiasts, people with ADHD, craft lovers, musicians, agnostics, people with autism. Randy's saying at the beginning of how he is a special needs dad, and that is something that he is trying to go through, and definitely something that he wants more visibility and community for. That could be an amazing topic for a podcast. Or simply stepping in from the experience that you got to share of being a parent and having that experience, and learning how to step into that supportive role, what it means to create an environment where questions can be made.
What is a D&D, what are D&D players?
So D&D is Dungeons and Dragons. That's more of just kind of like a throw in there of where it is a role-play strategy game. But it is something that has a large community surrounding it. This is more of a technical aspect of how many episodes in a season, how long are the episodes.
Yes, because you mentioned about season 2, so that's a good question I had. Well, how many episodes were in season 1?
Exactly. So season 1, I was contracted to do 12 episodes. And there is a strategy and a reason for why